Pain. For most of us, it is something to escape, something to numb, something to hide behind carefully constructed masks. But for Frida Kahlo, pain was not just an unwelcome guest in her life. It was the very brush that carved her legacy onto the canvas of history. Imagine a body shattered by tragedy, a spirit weighed down by betrayal, and yet, a hand that insisted on painting. Each stroke of color, each disturbing image, was not only an artistic statement, but also a psychological exorcism. Tonight we enter the haunting world of Frida Kahlo, where art was more than beauty. It was survival. And through her survival, we uncover the dark, yet liberating power of creative catharsis. Frida was only 18 when fate struck with merciless violence. A bus accident left her body broken, her spine fractured, her pelvis crushed, her leg mangled. The doctors expected her to live, but they did not expect her to rise. She would endure dozens of surgeries, endless corsets, and excruciating treatments. Most would have collapsed under the weight of such suffering, but Frida did something extraordinary. She transformed her agony into a visual language. Her art was not an escape from pain, it was an encounter with it. By staring into her own wounds and painting them for the world to see, she redefined what it meant to heal, not the absence of pain, but the ability to shape it into meaning. Psychologists often speak of catharsis, the process of releasing suppressed emotions to achieve relief. But in Frida's case, catharsis was not passive. It was violent, deliberate, and raw. She dragged her anguish from the depths of her psyche and forced it into tangible images. The broken column, where her body is split open and held together by nails and tears, is not simply art. It is a scream on canvas, a confession of vulnerability made eternal. For most of us, emotions evaporate into silence. For Frida, they crystallized into oil and color, demanding recognition. And in this recognition, she found power. But what is it about creative catharsis that can keep a soul alive when the body wishes to surrender? The answer lies in psychology. Pain, when unexpressed, festers like a hidden infection. It warps identity, distorts memory, and builds cages within the mind. Expression, however, even when terrifying or grotesque, acts like a release valve. It gives chaos a form, suffering a story. For Frida, painting her wounds was a way of mastering them. Instead of being consumed by her pain, she consumed it. Instead of being defined by tragedy, she defined tragedy on her own terms. And yet her paintings were not sterile self-help exercises. They were unsettling, shocking, even grotesque to many. But therein lies the genius. True catharsis is not about making pain look pretty. It is about making it real. It is about confronting the viewer with the truth most prefer to ignore, that human beings bleed not only in flesh but in spirit. In forcing her audience to stare into her intimate suffering, Frida mirrored the darkest chambers of their own subconscious. Her art was both a personal exorcism and a collective mirror, a reminder that suffering binds us all. But Frida's pain was not only physical. Emotional torment seeped into every corner of her life. Her turbulent marriage to Diego Rivera was a battlefield of love, betrayal, and obsession. His affairs with countless women, sometimes even with Frida's own friends and family, shattered her repeatedly. Yet she did not shield this devastation. Instead, she transformed it. In paintings like Diego and I, where her tear-streaked face is dominated by his image inscribed on her forehead, she revealed the psychological prison of toxic love. Pain became portrait, betrayal became brushstroke. By capturing her despair, she stole its power. As viewers, we are left haunted. We feel her agony, but also her defiance. We see not only the broken woman, but the relentless creator who refused to be silenced. And through this, psychology whispers a revelation. The act of externalizing suffering, of making it visible, reshapes it. Trauma, when locked inside, corrodes. But when expressed, even in the rawest and most disturbing ways, it transforms. Frida Kahlo was not just painting. She was rewiring her relationship with pain. She was proving that the human spirit can turn torment into testimony. Her art challenges us. How do we face our own wounds? Do we bury them, or do we dare to give them form? The psychology of catharsis suggests that the darkest parts of ourselves can become fuel for creation, if only we are brave enough to confront them. Frida's work is terrifying because it is honest, and honesty, when fused with art, has the power to both wound and heal. That is why her legacy endures. not because she painted flowers, but because she painted blood, bone, betrayal, and the unbearable weight of existence. Pain. For most of us, it is something to escape, something to numb, something to hide behind carefully constructed masks. But for Frida Kahlo, pain was not just an unwelcome guest in her life. It was the very brush that carved her legacy onto the canvas of history. Imagine a body shattered by tragedy, a spirit weighed down by betrayal, and yet, a hand that insisted on painting. Each stroke of color, each disturbing image, was not only an artistic statement, but also a psychological exorcism. Tonight, we enter the haunting world of Frida Kahlo, where art was more than beauty. It was survival. And through her survival, we uncover the dark, yet liberating power of creative catharsis. Frida was only 18 when fate struck with merciless violence. A bus accident left her body broken, her spine fractured, her pelvis crushed, her leg mangled. The doctors expected her to live, but they did not expect her to rise. She would endure dozens of surgeries, endless corsets, and excruciating treatments. Most would have collapsed under the weight of such suffering. But Frida did something extraordinary. She transformed her agony into a visual language. Her art was not an escape from pain. It was an encounter with it. By staring into her own wounds and painting them for the world to see, she redefined what it meant to heal. Not the absence of pain, but the ability to shape it into meaning. Psychologists often speak of catharsis, the process of releasing suppressed emotions to achieve relief. But in Frida's case, catharsis was not passive. It was violent, deliberate, and raw. She dragged her anguish from the depths of her psyche and forced it into tangible images. The broken column, where her body is split open and held together by nails and tears, is not simply art. It is a scream on canvas, a confession of vulnerability made eternal. For most of us, emotions evaporate into silence. For Frida, they crystallized into oil and color, demanding recognition. And in this recognition, she found power. But what is it about creative catharsis that can keep a soul alive when the body wishes to surrender? The answer lies in psychology. Pain, when unexpressed, festers like a hidden infection. It warps identity, distorts memory, and builds cages within the mind. Expression, however, even when terrifying or grotesque, acts like a release valve. It gives chaos a form, suffering a story. For Frida, painting her wounds was a way of mastering them. Instead of being consumed by her pain, she consumed it. Instead of being defined by tragedy, she defined tragedy on her own terms. And yet her paintings were not sterile self-help exercises. They were unsettling, shocking, even grotesque to many. But therein lies the genius. True catharsis is not about making pain look pretty. It is about making it real. It is about confronting the viewer with the truth most prefer to ignore, that human beings bleed not only in flesh, but in spirit. In forcing her audience to stare into her intimate suffering, Frida mirrored the darkest chambers of their own subconscious. Her art was both a personal exorcism and a collective mirror, a reminder that suffering binds us all. But Frida's pain was not only physical. Emotional torment seeped into every corner of her life. Her turbulent marriage to Diego Rivera was a battlefield of love, betrayal, and obsession. His affairs with countless women, sometimes even with Frida's own friends and family, shattered her repeatedly. Yet she did not shield this devastation. Instead, she transformed it. In paintings like Diego and I, where her tear-streaked face is dominated by his image inscribed on her forehead, she revealed the psychological prison of toxic love. Pain became portrait, betrayal became brushstroke. By capturing her despair, she stole its power. As viewers, we are left haunted. We feel her agony, but also her defiance. We see not only the broken woman, but the relentless creator who refused to be silenced. And through this, psychology whispers a revelation. The act of externalizing suffering, of making it visible, reshapes it. Trauma, when locked inside, corrodes, but when expressed, even in the rawest and most disturbing ways, it transforms. Frida Kahlo was not just painting. She was rewiring her relationship with pain. She was proving that the human spirit can turn torment into testimony. Her art challenges us. How do we face our own wounds? Do we bury them, or do we dare to give them form? The psychology of catharsis suggests that the darkest parts of ourselves can become fuel for creation if only we are brave enough to confront them. Frida's work is terrifying because it is honest, and honesty, when fused with art, has the power to both wound and heal. That is why her legacy endures, not because she painted flowers, but because she painted blood, bone, betrayal, and the unbearable weight of existence. To understand the full gravity of Frida Kahlo's art, we must descend deeper into the psychological corridors of her life. Pain was not an occasional intruder. It was her permanent companion. After the bus accident, her body became a prison of fractures, corsets, and endless medical interventions. Yet paradoxically, it was within this prison that her imagination found freedom. Lying bedridden for months, she began to paint herself, again and again. Her face became her most familiar landscape, her own suffering the most accessible subject. But these portraits were not narcissism, they were survival. In the absence of mobility, her art became a mirror of endurance, a way to assert, I exist, even in pain. Psychologically, this act of self-portraiture aligns with what modern therapists call self-reflective healing. When one repeatedly externalizes the self, especially under conditions of trauma, the fragmented identity begins to stitch itself together. Frida's repeated self-portraits, over 50 in her lifetime, were more than artistic exercises. They were attempts to piece together a shattered identity, to document the metamorphosis of a woman who refused to disappear into silence. Each self-image was not just a painting, it was evidence that she survived another day, another heartbreak, another night of agony. Her paintings also reveal a brutal honesty that most people shy away from. Society often demands that suffering be masked, polished, or transformed into narratives of triumph. But Frida rejected this sanitization. Instead, she presented herself wounded, bleeding, pierced, fragmented, or fused with strange symbols of fertility, death, and rebirth. In doing so, she redefined catharsis not as a beautiful release but as an unflinching confrontation. She did not paint what viewers wanted to see, she painted what she needed to express. And therein lies the psychology of true catharsis. Authenticity. Healing is not born from what is acceptable but from what is real. One of the most striking examples of this is The Two Fridas, painted in 1939 during her divorce from Diego Rivera. The painting shows two versions of herself seated side by side, hearts exposed, arteries connecting them. One Frida wears traditional Mexican attire, holding a small portrait of Diego, while the other, dressed in European clothing, clutches surgical scissors to stop the bleeding. It is both a literal and metaphorical representation of her fractured identity, the dual self torn between love and independence, tradition and modernity, unity and rupture. Psychologically, this mirrors the phenomenon of dissociation, where trauma splits identity into fragments as a way to survive overwhelming emotions. By painting her split selves, Frida externalized this fracture, making visible the invisible process of psychological survival. Catharsis for Frida was not only about individual release but also about reclaiming control over narrative. Trauma often robs victims of authorship. It dictates their story through silence, stigma, or shame. By painting, Frida seized the pen back from her pain. She decided how her suffering would be told. She transformed herself from a passive subject of tragedy into an active author of it. This aligns with what psychologists today call narrative therapy, the process of reshaping one's story to restore agency. Through her art, Frida was not merely surviving trauma, she was rewriting its script in her own colors. Yet, we cannot overlook the darker paradox. Catharsis, while powerful, did not save her from despair. Frida often confessed feelings of isolation, rage, and longing for death. Her journals revealed drawings of skeletons, words dripping with anguish, and confessions of unbearable loneliness. This reminds us that catharsis is not a cure-all. It does not erase trauma. It transforms its energy into creation, but the scars remain. The act of creation gave her meaning, but it did not erase her torment. And maybe that is the most haunting lesson of all. Healing is not about erasure, but endurance. Frida's embrace of indigenous Mexican culture also became a psychological weapon. By dressing in Tehuana clothing, weaving pre-Columbian symbols into her work, and merging herself with the earth in paintings like Roots, she expanded her identity beyond her broken body. She aligned herself with ancestry, culture, and myth, forces larger than her individual suffering. Psychologically, this is known as transcendence, the ability to connect one's trauma to something greater, thereby finding meaning in suffering. For Frida, her broken body was not just hers. It became a symbol of collective endurance, of Mexico's resilience, of women's struggle, of humanity's battle against mortality itself. But make no mistake, Frida's catharsis was not gentle. It was violent, raw, and often disturbing. She showed that true healing is not always soothing. It can be brutal, even terrifying. Her canvases, dripping with blood, pain, and surreal symbolism, were not comfort, but confrontation. They forced her audience to see the unseeable, to feel the unfathomable. In this way, she did not just heal herself. She challenged the world to confront its denial of pain. Her art became a mirror for collective repression, demanding that viewers face their own wounds as unflinchingly as she faced hers. Her entire body of work stands as proof of the paradox of catharsis. The very act of externalizing torment transforms it into beauty. Yet the torment never fully vanishes. It lingers, reshaped, reimagined, but still present. Frida Kahlo lived not in spite of her pain but through it. And in doing so, she revealed a truth most of us fear to admit, that suffering, when embraced, can become the most powerful engine of creation. Frida Kahlo's life is often romanticized as the story of a suffering artist who transformed pain into beauty. But to stop there is to miss the deeper, darker psychological truth. She was not simply painting for admiration, she was painting to survive. Her canvases were not windows into fantasy, but battlefields where she confronted her demons head-on. Each stroke of her brush was an act of defiance, each image a declaration that her suffering would not consume her in silence. Her work reminds us that catharsis is not a gentle release. It is often a violent wrestling match between the conscious self and the shadows that lurk beneath. Consider her painting Without Hope, created during a period when she was force-fed a strict diet due to her fragile health. In it, she depicts herself lying in bed, vomiting an endless stream of grotesque objects, animals, skulls, decaying matter. It is a raw portrayal of helplessness, the body reduced to a vessel of suffering. Psychologically, this piece embodies what many trauma survivors describe, the sense of being overwhelmed by forces beyond one's control. Frida did not disguise this horror, she unveiled it. By forcing herself to confront such imagery, she was enacting a brutal form of catharsis, dragging helplessness out of her subconscious and pinning it visibly on the canvas, where she could stare it down. This echoes a central idea in trauma psychology. When horrors remain unspoken, they fester, looping endlessly in the mind. But when expressed, even in grotesque imagery, they become bearable, containable. Frida's act of transforming her inner chaos into external form is what gave her resilience. It did not erase the pain, but it allowed her to coexist with it without being swallowed whole. In this sense, her paintings are therapeutic records, each one a survival strategy encoded in oil and symbolism. Yet Frida's art was never confined to private healing. She was fiercely political, deeply tied to the struggles of her time. By intertwining her personal suffering with broader themes of oppression, colonialism, and female identity, she expanded her catharsis into collective meaning. Paintings such as My Dress Hangs There and Self-Portrait on the Borderline Between Mexico and the United States reflect not only her personal anguish, but also her disdain for industrial modernity and her longing for cultural roots. Psychologically, this is a powerful mechanism. When individuals connect their suffering to larger narratives of collective struggle, they often find greater resilience. By embedding her pain within the story of her country, her gender, and her heritage, Frida transformed personal agony into a universal cry for recognition. But even as she externalized her trauma, Frida's relationship with death loomed constantly in her work. Skeletons, bleeding hearts, and surreal visions of decay haunt her canvases. These were not morbid decorations. They were reflections of her lived reality. She suffered lifelong illnesses, miscarriages, amputations, and repeated brushes with mortality. Death for her was never abstract. It was an intimate presence. Yet instead of fleeing from it, she embraced it. In psychological terms, this confrontation with mortality can be seen as a form of existential catharsis. By acknowledging death, even celebrating it through the Mexican tradition of Dia de los Muertos, she stripped it of its terror. She painted death into her identity, transforming it from a looming shadow into an integrated part of her story. Her journals deepen this picture. Within them, we find sketches of skeletons, fragments of poetry, and confessions of despair. Yet alongside the darkness, there are also bursts of humor, wit, and a strange vitality. This paradox reflects the essence of her catharsis. She could acknowledge despair without surrendering to it completely. Her art and writing became vessels that held both agony and resilience, allowing her to live in contradiction without being destroyed by it. For her, creation was not the denial of suffering, but the container that gave it form. Another striking dimension of her psychology was her refusal to separate the personal from the political, or the physical from the emotional. Her pain was embodied. It lived in her spine, her womb, her skin, and she painted it as such. But she also connected this embodied suffering to wider social struggles. In doing so, she anticipated modern understandings of trauma that emphasize its holistic nature. Psychological wounds are inseparable from the body and from social context. Frida intuitively knew this. She made her pain visible in all its dimensions, breaking down the artificial boundaries between psyche, flesh, and culture. And yet, despite this profound act of self-expression, Frida often longed for escape. Her diaries reveal repeated desires for death, and she attempted suicide more than once. Her catharsis was powerful, but it was not absolute. This stark reality highlights an uncomfortable truth. Even the most powerful creative release cannot always save us from despair. Catharsis is not a cure, but a coping mechanism. Frida lived on the razor's edge between survival and surrender, and her art was the fragile thread that kept her tethered to life. This is perhaps why her paintings pulse with such intensity. They were not created for art's sake, but for life itself. Through her work, Frida Kahlo showed us the paradoxical nature of healing. To heal does not mean to erase wounds. To heal means to give wounds a shape, a language, a place in the world where they can exist without consuming the self. Her paintings are monuments of this truth, each one a haunting reminder that art is not always about beauty, but about survival. As we move deeper into Frida Kahlo's story, her art reveals not only her intimate wounds, but also her unrelenting will to transform them into symbols larger than herself. Pain was her inheritance, but she refused to let it remain mute. She translated it into colors, textures, and images that unsettled the world. The more her body collapsed under illness and surgeries, the more her imagination expanded. Her canvases became sanctuaries of catharsis, where every scream, every betrayal, every fracture could live without shame. It was as if she whispered to her suffering, "If I cannot silence you, I will make you immortal." Take, for instance, her haunting work, Tree of Hope, Keep Firm. In this painting, two versions of Frida appear. One lying on a hospital gurney, her back split open with surgical wounds, and another sitting upright, dressed in traditional Mexican attire, holding a banner that reads, "Tree of Hope, Keep Firm." This dual image captures the psychological split between despair and resilience, between the body broken by knives and the spirit refusing to collapse. It is an artistic embodiment of cognitive dissonance, the coexistence of contradictory realities within the human psyche. Through this painting, Frida transformed unbearable suffering into a symbolic act of endurance. Her message was clear. Though her body bled, her spirit still demanded strength. Her defiance also extended to the very structure of identity. While many artists create idealized versions of themselves, Frida painted herself with brutal honesty. Mustache, unibrow, scars, tears, wounds. In doing so, she defied not only aesthetic conventions, but also psychological defenses. Most people mask their pain to preserve dignity. Frida stripped herself bare. This radical vulnerability is the core of her catharsis. It proved that strength is not found in denying suffering, but in exposing it without apology. By making her wounds visible, she dismantled shame, turning vulnerability into rebellion. But catharsis in Frida's hands was not only personal, it was deeply intertwined with gender and power. Living in a patriarchal world, she weaponized her art to reveal the often silenced agonies of female experience: miscarriage, infertility, betrayal, and the suffocating weight of societal expectations. Works like My Birth confront viewers with images of childbirth and death intertwined, breaking taboos and forcing recognition of the female body as a site of both creation and destruction. Psychologically, these paintings function as acts of collective catharsis, dragging into the light traumas that women had long been expected to suffer in silence. Frida's canvases became not only her therapy, but a radical exposure of truths the world preferred to hide. The act of exposing female suffering was also an act of empowerment. By turning her private wounds into public art, Frida reclaimed control over narratives that were historically silenced. Trauma silences by nature. It isolates, hides, and corrodes identity. But Frida transformed this silence into sound, this invisibility into spectacle. She forced the world to look, and in looking, to acknowledge. Her catharsis was not quiet release. It was confrontation. And in this confrontation, she carved a new kind of power, the authority to define her own story in a world that tried to write it for her. Her relationship with Diego Rivera remained central to this narrative. The storm of love and betrayal they shared fueled some of her most powerful work. But instead of being consumed by his shadow, she wielded it as artistic material. Diego on My Mind, for example, shows Frida's face adorned in Tijuana attire, with a miniature portrait of Diego painted onto her forehead. It is both a confession of obsession and a symbolic declaration that he haunted her psyche. Psychologically, this reflects the process of object relations, how significant others are internalized into the psyche, shaping identity and emotion. Frida externalized this haunting by painting it, reclaiming some measure of control over the psychological grip Diego held on her. Her art thus became both a love letter and a purge, both devotion and exorcism. Yet despite the confrontation and release her art offered, despair often lingered. Pain has a way of regenerating itself, especially when rooted in chronic illness. Toward the end of her life, as her health deteriorated further, her leg amputated, her mobility severely limited, her art grew darker, heavier. Yet even then, she painted. Even then, she forced her suffering into images that outlived her flesh. This persistence reveals the ultimate function of her catharsis. It was not about erasing pain, but about transcending it through creation. The body may decay, but the image remains. In this way, Frida conquered mortality itself, leaving behind a legacy that continues to bleed, to scream, to demand recognition. Her catharsis was also spiritual in its own way. Though not conventionally religious, her work often blended Catholic iconography with pre-Columbian myth, creating a symbolic language that bridged personal suffering with cosmic themes. She became saint, martyr, and goddess within her own canvases, elevating her pain into myth. Psychologically, this can be seen as archetypal transformation, the process of turning personal trauma into universal myth that resonates across cultures and generations. By elevating her suffering to the level of myth, Frida ensured that her wounds would speak not just for her, but for all who endure pain and refuse to be silenced. Ultimately, Frida Kahlo's catharsis was not a clean escape from torment, but a continuous cycle of confrontation, release, and re-engagement. Her paintings reveal the paradox of healing, that to survive, one must not deny pain but continually wrestle with it, continually shape it into meaning. And in that relentless cycle, she achieved something extraordinary. She turned her agony into immortality. Frida Kahlo's story is not one of triumph in the traditional sense. She did not overcome her pain. She lived with it, wrestled with it, and painted it until her final breath. This is why her work resonates so deeply. It is not a polished narrative of victory, but a raw testament to endurance. Pain was her constant, but instead of allowing it to silence her, she transformed it into a language of color, symbol, and myth. Her art remains a reminder that suffering, when faced without denial, can become a source of creation so powerful that it outlasts death itself. Psychologically, her legacy is a masterclass in catharsis. She embodied the paradox that while trauma may never fully disappear, it can be reshaped. By externalizing her anguish, she robbed it of its ability to remain hidden and corrosive. Each painting was a ritual of release, a confrontation with the shadow that might have devoured her from within. For those who look at her work today, the impact is profound. We are not merely observers of her suffering, but participants in her catharsis. Her canvases invite us to face our own wounds, to stop burying them in silence, and to begin the terrifying but liberating work of giving them form. Her life also forces us to rethink what it means to be strong. Strength is often misunderstood as invulnerability, the ability to remain untouched by pain. But Frida Kahlo showed us that true strength lies in vulnerability, the courage to expose wounds rather than conceal them, to live authentically rather than pretend. Her paintings are not shields but mirrors, reflecting the fragility of the human condition alongside its astonishing resilience. They whisper a truth that psychology confirms. Healing does not come from erasure, but from the courage to confront and transform what hurts us most. Her death in 1954 did not silence her voice. If anything, it amplified it. Today, her work continues to haunt and inspire, studied by psychologists, feminists, artists, and all who search for meaning in the midst of suffering. The universality of her catharsis ensures her immortality. Every brushstroke carries a challenge. What will you do with your pain? Will you let it consume you, or will you turn it into something that lives beyond you? This is the eternal question she leaves us with, a challenge not only to endure, but to create. The moral of Frida Kahlo's story is both devastating and liberating. Pain is inevitable, but silence is optional. We may not choose our tragedies, but we can choose what we create from them. Catharsis is not about forgetting, it is about transforming. Like Frida, we are all fractured in some way, but within those fractures lies the potential for expression, for connection, for legacy. Her art proves that suffering, when given form, can transcend despair and become a torch for others to follow. So let this story linger within you. Let Frida's resilience echo in your own struggles. Ask yourself, what shadows have you been hiding from? What wounds remain unspoken? And most importantly, how can you transform them into something greater than yourself? Because if Frida could bleed onto the canvas and create immortality from her torment, then perhaps we too can carve meaning from our pain. Her legacy demands that we try. Frida Kahlo painted her pain not as decoration, but as defiance. Her work is a timeless lesson in the psychology of creative catharsis, reminding us that while we cannot always escape suffering, we can transform it into something eternal. And maybe, just maybe, that transformation is the closest thing we have to immortality. If you were moved by this journey through Frida's art and the psychology behind it, don't forget, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more deep, dark explorations of art, history, and the human soul. Every week we uncover stories that reveal how suffering, resilience, and creativity intertwine in haunting but unforgettable ways. Thank you for watching. Until the next video, where we dive even deeper into the shadows of the human experience.